The Freeway Killer, the Patrick Kearney story. In the sprawling expanse of Southern California during the 1970s, where endless freeways connected beach towns to desert communities, a predator used these very arteries of civilization as his hunting grounds and dumping sites. Patrick Wayne Kearney, one of three men who would earn the moniker the Freeway Killer, conducted a reign of terror that would claim at least 21 confirmed victims, with confessions to as many as 43 murders. His story is one of calculated violence, careful planning, and a double life that fooled even those closest to him. This is the chronicle of Patrick Kearney, an aerospace engineer by day, serial killer by night, whose crimes would forever change how Southern California viewed the safety of its highways. The Southern California of the 1970s was a region in transformation. The counterculture movement of the 1960s had given way to a more complex social landscape. Gay liberation movements were gaining momentum following the Stonewall riots, yet homosexuality remained largely stigmatized. This created underground communities and secretive meeting places that would become part of Kearney's hunting grounds. The freeway system, California's pride and symbol of modern progress, had created a new kind of mobility and anonymity. Hitchhiking was common practice, seen as both economical and adventurous. Young people stood at on-ramps with their thumbs out, trusting in the kindness of strangers. It was this trust that predators like Patrick Kearney would exploit with deadly consequences. Law enforcement in this era faced significant challenges. Different jurisdictions rarely communicated effectively. Forensic science was primitive by today's standards, and serial murder was still a poorly understood phenomenon. The term serial killer itself wouldn't enter common usage until the late 1970s, around the time Kearney's crimes were being uncovered. Patrick Wayne Kearney was born on September 24, 1939, in Los Angeles, California, the eldest of three sons. His early life appeared unremarkable on the surface, a middle-class upbringing in post-war America. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy, troubling patterns were already emerging. As a child, Kearney was thin, bookish, and often bullied by his peers. He retreated into fantasy worlds, developing an early fascination with guns and violence. By his teenage years, he had begun having violent sexual fantasies, though he kept these dark thoughts carefully hidden from family and friends. His intelligence and academic abilities provided a perfect mask for his developing psychopathy. After high school, Kearney served in the United States Air Force, where his technical aptitude was recognized and cultivated. Following his military service, he pursued a career in engineering, eventually finding work in California's booming aerospace industry. To his colleagues and neighbors, he was a quiet, intelligent professional, the last person anyone would suspect of harboring homicidal impulses. In 1967, Kearney met David Douglas Hill, who would become his long-term partner. Hill, younger and more socially outgoing, seemed to balance Kearney's introverted nature. They lived together in Redondo Beach, presenting themselves as roommates to maintain appearances in an era when open homosexuality could cost someone their career. This relationship would last throughout Kearney's killing spree, with Hill remaining apparently unaware of his partner's dark activities. While the exact date of Patrick Kearney's first murder remains uncertain, investigators believe his killing career may have begun as early as 1968, though confirmed victims date primarily from 1971 onward. His earliest known victim was found on April 19, 1971, a young man whose dismembered remains were discovered in Orange County. Kearney's method was methodical and evolved from years of fantasy. He would typically pick up young male hitchhikers or men from gay bars, offering them rides or inviting them to his home. Once he had his victim isolated, he would shoot them in the head with a Derringer .22 pistol, often while engaged in sexual activity. The small-caliber weapon was chosen deliberately. It was quiet and caused less external damage, allowing Kearney to preserve the bodies for his necrophilic activities. What set Kearney apart from many serial killers was his meticulous approach to body disposal. Using his engineering skills and mechanical knowledge, he would dismember the bodies with surgical precision, often in the bathtub of his home. He would then wrap the body parts in trash bags, creating what investigators would later call trash bag murders. These packages would be dumped along California's vast freeway system, sometimes hundreds of miles apart. Throughout the early 1970s, bodies began appearing along Southern California's highways with disturbing regularity. Young men, many of them never identified, were found in various states of decomposition. The geographic spread of the discoveries, from Los Angeles County to Orange County, from Riverside to San Bernardino, initially prevented authorities from connecting the crimes. Kearney's victim selection revealed both his preferences and his cunning. He primarily targeted young men between the ages of 14 and 25, many of whom were hitchhikers, drifters, or members of the gay community. These were individuals who might not be immediately missed, whose disappearances might be attributed to the transient lifestyle of the era. Among his known victims was John Otis LeMay, a 17-year-old who disappeared on March 13, 1975. His remains were found 5 days later in Orange County. Another was Albert Rivera, 21, whose body was discovered on July 4, 1971. Each discovery added to a growing pattern that investigators were slowly beginning to recognize. Narrator. By 1975, Kearney's murders had become more frequent and brazen. The decomposed remains of victims were being discovered almost monthly. On November 7, 1975, the body of George Pestalozzi, 28, was found in Riverside County. Less than 2 weeks later, on November 20th, Mark Howard Hall, 22, was discovered in similar circumstances. The year 1976 saw an explosion of violence. Kearney murdered at least 8 confirmed victims that year, including Kenneth Buchanan, 17, found on April 3rd, and Larry Gene Pearson, whose body was discovered on December 24th, a grim Christmas Eve discovery for investigators. The accelerating pace suggested a killer losing control, becoming more reckless with each murder. Despite the increasing body count, Kearney maintained his facade of normalcy. He continued working as an aerospace engineer, maintaining his relationship with David Hill and presenting himself as an ordinary, if quiet, member of the community. His ability to compartmentalize his life, separating his murderous activities from his daily routine, enabled him to avoid suspicion for years. Several times during his killing spree, Kearney came dangerously close to being caught. On multiple occasions, witnesses reported seeing victims getting into vehicles that matched the description of Kearney's car. However, the lack of coordinated investigation between different jurisdictions meant these leads were never properly pursued. In one particularly close call, a young man managed to escape from Kearney's vehicle after becoming suspicious of his intentions. The victim reported the incident to police, providing a description of both Kearney and his car. However, without physical evidence and with the victim unwilling to pursue the matter further due to fear of exposing his sexuality, the investigation went nowhere. Kearney's partner, David Hill, later claimed to have noticed strange behaviors, Kearney coming home at odd hours, unexplained absences, and occasional blood stains in their vehicle. However, Hill maintained he never suspected the true nature of Kearney's activities, a claim that investigators and prosecutors would later question but never definitively disprove. By early 1977, the pattern of murders had become too obvious to ignore. Los Angeles County Sheriff's investigators, working with other jurisdictions, began to piece together the connections between the various highway dumpings. They recognized similarities in the victims' profiles, the method of dismemberment, and the distinctive trash bag packaging. A task force was formed, bringing together investigators from multiple agencies. They began re-examining old cases, looking for connections that had been missed. The term trash bag murders entered the lexicon of Southern California law enforcement, describing a series of crimes that seemed to be the work of a single, methodical killer. The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. In July 1977, the murder of John LeMay's friend, Arturo Marquez, led investigators to examine LeMay's disappearance more closely. Witnesses remembered seeing LeMay leave with an older man in a distinctive vehicle, a lead that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. As investigators began focusing on the LeMay case, they discovered that Patrick Kearney had been questioned briefly during the initial investigation but dismissed as a suspect. Re-examining this lead, detectives began surveillance of Kearney, noting his movements and behavior patterns. The pressure of the investigation began to show. Kearney, aware that police were closing in, started making preparations. He destroyed evidence, cleaned his home obsessively, and began planning his next moves. However, the weight of his crimes and the intensity of the investigation were taking their toll. On July 1, 1977, knowing that arrest was imminent, Patrick Kearney and David Hill made a dramatic decision. They drove to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department and surrendered themselves. Kearney, ever the controlled engineer, had calculated that turning himself in might give him some leverage in the legal proceedings to come. Following his surrender, Patrick Kearney shocked investigators with his cooperation. Unlike many serial killers who deny their crimes or remain silent, Kearney began confessing in detail. He admitted to 28 murders initially, though he would later claim the number was as high as 43. His confessions were delivered with a chilling matter-of-factness, describing each murder with clinical precision. Kearney's detailed confessions helped investigators close numerous unsolved cases. He provided information about dump sites, victim identities, and methods that only the killer could have known. His engineering background was evident in the systematic way he recalled dates, locations, and details of each crime. During interrogations, Kearney revealed the psychological motivations behind his crimes. He described a compulsion he couldn't control, violent fantasies that had plagued him since childhood, and a complete lack of empathy for his victims. He spoke of the murders as if describing a technical process, showing no emotion or remorse. Given the weight of evidence and Kearney's detailed confessions, prosecutors had an overwhelming case. However, California's death penalty had been struck down by the state Supreme Court in 1972, only to be reinstated in 1977. This legal complexity meant that Kearney, despite his numerous murders, would not face execution for crimes committed during the moratorium period. On December 21, 1977, Patrick Kearney pleaded guilty to 21 counts of murder, accepting a plea bargain that spared him the death penalty in exchange for his confessions and cooperation. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. David Hill, after extensive investigation, was released without charges, as prosecutors could find no evidence of his participation in or knowledge of the murders. The families of victims had mixed reactions to the plea bargain. Some were relieved to have closure and avoid a lengthy trial. Others felt cheated of justice, believing that life in prison was insufficient punishment for such heinous crimes. The identified victims' families finally had answers, but for the families of those still unidentified, questions remained. The capture of Patrick Kearney marked the end of one chapter in California's struggle with serial murder, but it was far from the last. In a terrible irony, two other serial killers would also earn the nickname the Freeway Killer, William Bonin and Randy Kraft, both operating in Southern California during overlapping periods with Kearney. The case led to significant changes in law enforcement procedures. California agencies began implementing better communication systems, sharing information across jurisdictions more effectively. The concept of behavioral profiling, still in its infancy, gained credibility as investigators recognized patterns that could help identify serial offenders earlier. Public awareness campaigns about the dangers of hitchhiking intensified. The free-spirited culture of the 1970s began to give way to a more cautious approach to personal safety. Parents warned children about accepting rides from strangers with renewed urgency, and the sight of hitchhikers on California's on-ramps became increasingly rare. Forensic psychologists who studied Kearney's case identified him as a classic organized serial killer. His high intelligence, methodical approach, and ability to maintain a normal facade for years fit established patterns. His choice of victims, those on society's margins, reflected both a predatory cunning and a deep-seated hatred. The necrophilic aspect of Kearney's crimes revealed a desire for complete control. By killing his victims immediately, he could possess them completely without risk of rejection or resistance. This psychological profile would later help investigators understand similar offenders and develop strategies for investigation and prevention. Kearney's ability to maintain a long-term relationship while conducting his murders raised questions about the nature of psychopathy. How could someone capable of such horrific acts also maintain human connections? The answer lies in the psychopath's ability to mimic emotions without feeling them, to wear normalcy like a mask that can be removed at will. Patrick Kearney was initially incarcerated at California State Prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. Reports from prison indicated that he remained a model prisoner, quiet, compliant, and keeping largely to himself. He worked various prison jobs and avoided the violence that often characterizes life sentences. Over the years, Kearney has given few interviews and shown no genuine remorse for his crimes. He remains a figure of fascination for criminal psychologists and true crime enthusiasts, though he has consistently refused to provide additional information about potential unclaimed victims. As of 2024, Patrick Kearney remains alive at age 85, still serving his life sentence. He has outlived many of his investigators, prosecutors, and even some of the victims' family members. His continued existence serves as a reminder that sometimes killers face a different kind of justice. Not the quick end of execution, but decades of confinement, living with their crimes. While Patrick Kearney's name lives on in criminal history, it's crucial to remember his victims, young men whose lives were cut tragically short. Each was someone's son, brother, friend. They had dreams, aspirations, and futures that were stolen from them. Many of Kearney's victims remain unidentified to this day, known only as John Does in police files. These unknown victims represent one of the case's enduring tragedies, families who never received closure, who may still wonder what happened to their missing loved ones. Advances in DNA technology continue to offer hope that someday these victims might be identified and returned to their families. The identified victims included students, workers, and young men trying to find their place in the world. John LeMay was studying to become an electrician. Mark Howard Hall was a college student with dreams of becoming a teacher. Each life lost represented not just an individual tragedy, but a loss to their communities and society as a whole. The Patrick Kearney case remains relevant to contemporary discussions about serial murder, victim vulnerability, and criminal justice. His targeting of marginalized individuals, particularly gay men and transients, highlights how societal prejudices can create opportunities for predators. Modern DNA technology has reopened some aspects of the case. Investigators continue to work on identifying John Doe victims from the 1970s, using genetic genealogy and other advanced techniques unavailable during the original investigation. Each identification brings closure to another family and adds another name to the list of those we must remember. The case also serves as a reminder of how far forensic science and law enforcement cooperation have advanced. Today's VICAP system, DNA databases, and interagency communication protocols might have caught Kearney much sooner, potentially saving lives. The Patrick Kearney case taught law enforcement valuable lessons about serial murder investigation. The importance of centralizing information, recognizing patterns across jurisdictions, and taking all missing persons reports seriously, regardless of the victim's background, became standard protocol partly because of cases like this. For society, the case highlighted the vulnerability of marginalized communities. The fact that Kearney could kill for possibly a decade with minimal detection revealed how certain lives were valued less than others. This recognition has slowly led to more equitable treatment of all victims, regardless of their social status. The psychological profile developed from studying Kearney and similar killers has helped law enforcement identify potential serial offenders earlier. The understanding that organized killers can maintain normal facades while committing horrific crimes has changed how investigations approach suspects. Patrick Wayne Kearney's story is more than a chronicle of murder. It's a window into a dark period of American history when serial killers seemed to emerge from every shadow. His crimes exploited the very freedoms that defined 1970s California: the open highways, the sexual liberation, the trust in strangers. Today, as Patrick Kearney lives out his remaining years in prison, the highways he once used as dumping grounds continue to carry millions of Californians to their destinations. Most drivers pass by the locations where bodies were found without knowing the dark history. Perhaps that's as it should be, life moving forward while still remembering those lost. The legacy of the Freeway Killer case lives on in improved law enforcement techniques, greater awareness of predatory behavior, and memorials to victims whose names we know and those we may never learn. It reminds us that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades, and that protecting society's vulnerable requires constant vigilance. This account is dedicated to all his victims, those identified and those still unknown, and to the investigators who worked tirelessly to stop his reign of terror. If this examination of one of California's most prolific serial killers has provided insight into this dark chapter of criminal history, please consider sharing this video to help raise awareness about the ongoing efforts to identify remaining victims and the importance of protecting vulnerable members of our society.